Road & Track Presents The Need for Speed on the 3DO was an ambitious game for its time. Driving sports cars with believable physics and looks through environments that almost looked like something you would actually be able to see in reality was a real testament to the fast advancing technology that could be realized in video games going forward. But as impressive as it was, not a lot of people knew about it back when it first came out. A big reason for this being that it was only released on the Panasonic 3DO, the most powerful home console on the market when it launched in 1993, but with a small library lacking games that took proper advantage of the hardware and selling for the retail price of $699, few were interested in what it had to offer compared to its more affordable competition from Nintendo and Sega. This led EA Canada to instead focus their efforts on porting the Need for Speed to the fast-growing PC platform, which eventually led to the MS-DOS port releasing the following year on the 31st of August 1995, exactly a year to the day from the 3DO version's release the previous year. I have right here the full big box release from North America, and it's quite a treat for the eyes, I'm sure you'll agree. Removing the lid reveals a lot of the standard stuff that came with PC games at the time, the game on a single CD-ROM, an EA Canada registration card, a reference booklet for technical troubleshooting and system requirements, and a black and white manual covering things that manuals normally cover: installation, game modes, gameplay tips, that kind of thing. Also, being a knockoff Oz myself, I have an Australian release here on my shelf as well. Content-wise, it's exactly the same game, but physically, the release is a bit smaller but thicker than the US box, and it comes in a slipcase cover. Otherwise, the contents remain mostly the same, the only difference being that the front cover of the manual is printed in colour, although the rest are still in black and white. It doesn't matter, you get the idea already, let's just get into the game. Starting the game up and sitting through the company logos reveal that the game intro has been reworked to further cement its ties to Road & Track magazine with less explosions and more words. Okay. Arriving at the main menu reveals that it too has been completely overhauled, this time with clear labels for all menu options and a new music track to go with it. Also overhauled are the car showcases. We now have a new narrator, more in-depth information, and said information now being sorted into their own individual categories.
Wheel hop off the line hinders drag strip starts, but once underway the RX-7 is explosively fast.
With all this new info, it really does become obvious that the folks at Pioneer really wanted to go all in and represent these cars to their most realistic and detailed extents, and pay each one of them their due diligence visually, mechanically, and historically. Good stuff. It's more or less understandable why the average player wouldn't care about things like this, but in my opinion it really adds to the whole car enthusiast angle the game is going for, and gives you every reason and more to love and respect each one. Now unfortunately there aren't any new cars to speak of, but we do now have 3 more circuit tracks that have been added with this DOS release: Rusty Springs, Autumn Valley, and Vertigo Ridge. In addition, we now have 2 new race modes to play around with as well. Single race, which is exactly what it sounds like, against either one car, all the cars, or all of one car, and tournament mode, where you race through all the tracks in the game with different vehicle groups for each race, and earn points towards a leaderboard where the driver with the most points at the end wins, like a tournament. Now all this may sound great, but you may be asking yourself, what's the actual gameplay like compared to the 3DO? Well, let's jump into a race and find out. The overall resolution has seen a significant upgrade to 640 by 480 over the 320 by 240 original, though you still have the option to switch between the two, and the 256 color SVGA display brings out so much more detail in the various textures that were just a bit too blurry beforehand, so if you like your pixels nice and sharp, this can only be an improvement. One other big aesthetic change is the color palette. It's noticeably darker and less vibrant than before. I guess you could argue that it maybe looks more realistic. I don't know, it really comes down to your personal preference in this case. But perhaps the biggest change of all in this DOS port of the Need for Speed is the speed. You've probably noticed that the game now runs a lot faster than the 3DO original, giving a greater sense of speed while keeping the racing both engaging and enticing to the average player. This in turn took the game from being a mostly true-to-life driving simulation to a more approachable, fast, wheel-to-wheel racing experience that could be enjoyed by everyone. So in a way, this could be seen as the series' first move towards the arcade style that it would become known for in later years, a sentiment that a lot of longtime fans believe started with the second game in the series, Need for Speed 2. However, unlike Need for Speed 2, whose handling makes no attempt at all to be realistic and instead goes all in on arcade silliness, the Need for Speed combined the best of both worlds, creating a new driving model that can be enjoyed just as much with a steering wheel, keyboard, or even a mouse. So in another way, this could also be considered one of the first Simcade driving games. Realistic, but accessible. No doubt attracting a wider, more casual player base with it. And this was still a couple of years before games like Gran Turismo would seal its wider popularity and use in more games to come. Now, I feel like it's also worth mentioning that at the time, not everyone was exactly happy with this change to begin with, and while I'm sure car nuts at the time would have been perfectly fine with the original's more realistic, slower pace, I'm sure most of you will agree that this looks way more exciting than this. So, I think we get it by now. The pixels are sharper, the colors are colorful, and the speed is speedier. That's cool, but what about the rest of the game? Is there any kind of reason to race now? An actual progression system, perhaps? Well, kind of. Remember that tournament mode I mentioned earlier? There's actually a few extras you can unlock through this mode. After winning your first tournament, for example, you'll unlock the new secret bonus track, Las Vegas. A track that by every measure of its design is about as far removed from the other tracks as you could possibly get. But that's not all. After winning the tournament a second time, start a single race and type EAC Power as the player name, and it will unlock this absolute monster, the Warrior PTO E2. It's a completely fictional 835 horsepower jet-powered hypercar with an estimated top speed of 269 miles per hour, and it's absolutely ridiculous, leaving every other car for dead on the straights and in the corners with its superior handling. Needless to say, it's in a class of its own, if you can handle it. You know, it can actually make head-to-head mode a bit more fun, having to dodge traffic at such high speed, and dominating every race you use it in is fun for a while. Hell, do it at Las Vegas. It only makes sense that you'd want an insane car to drive the most equally insane track in the game, and Pioneer Productions definitely delivered. And at the end of the race, when you're finally done with crashing and jumping and flipping, you can save your replay and rewatch your best races anytime from the perspective of any car in the race with a handful of unique, albeit very similar camera angles exclusive to replays. Always a welcome addition when you get murdered twice after the finish line and your friends don't believe you because they're ignorant snobs who aren't really your friends. Stop lying to yourself. But going back to the subject of cheat codes real quick, there's actually some other really cool ones you can enter when typing in your driver name that do some really cool stuff. Typing in EAC Rally unlocks rally mode, covering all the roads and gravel, making power sliding not only possible but also a necessity if you want to win. It's also very fun. This cheat also changes the scenery and elevation of the Rusty Springs track to make it more Egyptian themed. Interesting. There's also another arcade speed up cheat that makes the game even faster than it already is, but for now, as far as content goes, that's about all the Need for Speed has going for it. Not that it really matters. It was already a solid game on the 3DO, but as good as it was, admittedly there wasn't much content to speak of. This port does an incredible job streamlining this already great game for a wider audience and adds just enough extra content to really justify another version and the jump to more powerful hardware, at least in my opinion. I know having extra content to unlock was what sealed the deal for me, as someone who likes having an excuse to play through the game again on a fresh install every now and then. Okay, well, I mean, it's not a make or break thing per se, but having a little bit of incentive to play goes a long way with some people, and I'm definitely one of them. It's nothing but an improvement, it's fantastic, and I love it. But that's not to say that there still isn't room for a bit more improvement in a few places. And so the following year, in 1996, following the console ports, came the second and final PC version, the Need for Speed Special Edition. This version adds support for Windows 95, and improves on the DOS release in several key areas which we'll get to soon enough. But before we get into that, let's once again take a look at the glorious big box release. I wanted to spotlight the US version of the box in particular since it's really shiny, looks really nice on a shelf, and it's without a doubt one of the rarest Need for Speed boxes to find if you collect big box PC games like me. I don't really have much to say regarding the contents of the release, but just look at that box, man. Definitely the centerpiece of any Need for Speed collection if you're lucky enough to come across a copy. Starting the game up once again reveals that the intro has once again been changed to better fit the music by emphasizing the speed, wacky effects, and FMV, as if the game didn't have enough of these already, but it also makes it 100 times more radical, so I can give it a pass. Moving on over to the menu design, and it's mostly identical. The only real noticeable change being that you now choose your race mode and opponents from the main menu, instead of having to go into the options like you did in the DOS version. All the tracks from the DOS game also make a return in Special Edition, in addition to 2 brand new tracks exclusive to this version, Burnt Sienna and Transtropolis. Both very technical and challenging tracks to drive, but still just as pretty as the rest. Part of that being down to the slight improvements made to the rendering engine thanks to the inclusion of DirectX 2 support in Windows 95 mode. The Special Edition also adds options for both LAN and online multiplayer with up to 8 players through modem, IPX and TCP/IP connections. The original DOS version only had 2-player LAN. So outside of wanting to try multiplayer, there really isn't any point trying to use Windows mode to play casually since it's damn near impossible to get the game running in this mode on modern machines. They're both pretty much the same anyway, so I'd say just save yourself the hassle and run it in DOS mode for the sake of your sanity. All you'll need to do is download and run a version of UniVBE before starting the game in DOSBox to fix the FMVs, and you'll be all set to go racing. The gameplay itself hasn't really changed a whole lot since the DOS release, but there are some key differences which set this version apart from the rest. Like the game being sped up once again by just a tiny bit, and we now have a track map in the bottom right corner of the HUD replacing the gearshift graphics, so you can see if your opponents are close by, and to get a vague idea of where the road's going. It's vague since most of the time it shifts around all over the place and typically doesn't show the next corner all that well until you're about to take it. So in my opinion, I'd say use it as a kind of primitive proximity indicator. I mean, at least that way you'll get some kind of use out of it, and to be honest, you can memorize all the tracks in this game pretty easily anyway, so just do that. After all, being able to consistently take those long banked corners and tight tunnel hairpins at speed without hitting the invisible roadside walls is really satisfying, considering how much they slow you down if you hit them on even the slightest of angles. Another thing which you've probably noticed by now that might be able to help you with that, but also might not, is the modified chase camera, which now sits a lot higher and is now for the most part fixed to the back of the car. On one hand, you can see a lot more of the road ahead of you, making it better for racing, which is very good. But on the other hand, if you want to just cruise around at your own pace, taking in the colourful and unique scenery, it definitely isn't suited for that, unlike the original's loose sweeping camera, which felt like it was definitely a lot better for showing off your surroundings and admiring the blocky rear of your car. Speaking of surroundings, the Special Edition now adds an option to change the time of day, which in reality just adds a really tacky color filter to the screen that really isn't convincing in the slightest and doesn't really do anything beyond making everything harder to see. So unless you for some reason like major eye strain, just leave this option alone, you're not really missing anything. But the best, and I mean the best change of all in this Special Edition that you should leave alone for a different reason entirely, or in my case turn all the way up, is that absolutely amazing soundtrack. There's now a healthy selection of both rock and techno tracks that play in the menus and crucially during the race now, and it makes the game so much better. It's cheesy as hell, but I don't care, and neither should you if you're a fan of the genres. I swear every single one of these songs just screams, yeah, it's the 90s man, come on, let's go have fun driving cool cars and have a good time. It's awesome and I refuse to race without it. Finally, on a bit more of a downtone minor note, the ways in which you unlock all the bonus content in the Special Edition has been completely changed from the DOS release. For instance, the cheat codes to unlock the Warrior Car, Rally Mode and Arcade Speed-Up gameplay in the original have all been removed. No shortcuts here. Instead, the Warrior Car now just unlocks with Las Vegas when you win the tournament for the first time, Rally Mode unlocks confusingly when you win 2 tournaments, and the Arcade Speed-Up mode cheat is now just gone. I guess they figured the game was already fast enough, which I can understand, I guess. The amount of improvements made to the game through the Special Edition already turned this excellent game into an unmissable gem for those who are into old DOS games. It may not have some big progression system or customization options or anything like that. Hell, you can't even change the color of your car. But that's fine. It's a simple game by design, and it does a great job of being a fun stress reliever when racing games nowadays feel like a bit too much. And since nowadays the racing genre is now saturated with titles that are getting bigger and more ambitious all the time, a game like the Need for Speed I think can be appreciated now more than ever. I know I certainly do, since I still go back to play it every so often when I get a free minute. I mean, that minute will usually turn into an hour, but you know what, that's an hour worth spent. If the 3DO version was a bit too slow for your liking, the Need for Speed Special Edition is a must-play. Seriously, just go out and download it off an abandonware site or track down a CD of it online. I'm being 100% serious when I say you'd be doing yourself a crazy disservice not to. So in conclusion, I think I've made my point by now. The Need for Speed is awesome.